Hey, good evening, everybody. Hey, we appreciate you coming out to the 18th Walk Through Black History program. I'm Ernest Jackson. I am not the pastor. Yep. I'm the moderator here at First Baptist Church. You know, our church motto is called Exploring Faith, Embracing Diversity, and Encouraging Hearts. So over the years with these programs, we've highlighted some famous people, some very little-known people, and some special events. Tonight, we highlight the life of Bella da Costa Greene. Peggy Jackson is our director, but this is a community-wide effort. The actors come from multiple churches around our community and from around the tri-state, so it's been a wonderful process of people building relationships as they've been learning the story and learning their part. So that's been what we call encouraging. So it's been encouraging to me to see what's happening in our community. And I want to thank all of you for attending today, right? It shows that our community is engaged and believes in learning about our own selves, right? All right, thank you. So just a few things that I need to cover before we get started. In terms of if there's an emergency, there are two exits in the rear. There's access to the lower level in the back, and there's an exit behind me through the black curtain right here. And now, at this time, I'd like to ask everyone to put your phones on silent or vibrate or something, right? We want to make sure that we do that. All good? All right, let's give a warm welcome to our narrator, Miss Bridget Boone.
This story is about J.P. Morgan's personal librarian, Bella da Costa Greene, a biracial woman who was raised in a family of color and had been a part of Washington, D.C.'s black community called the Black 400. Belle would change her name as an adult and live her life as white. She is an extraordinary woman, famous for her intellect, style, and wit. She will share what lengths she went through to protect her family and her legacy, and how she preserved her carefully crafted white identity in the racist world in which she lived. May I introduce Bella da Costa Greene.
Well, what can I say that hasn't been said before? That I would do just about anything to achieve my dreams? Go as far as to masquerade and deceive those around me into a better life, better education, the ideal future? That I did it for the celebrity status and the notoriety, the fame. Well, some of that is true, but not all of it. I did it for other reasons also. Times were different, and they were harder. My people were considered subhuman. Now, you may be wondering what I'm talking about. It's a thing called passing. Passing is when one is able to move undetected between a culture or a community. It was a way of us providing ourselves the opportunities that wouldn't have been there elsewise. Some people went as far as to take their lightness and uplift other members of the black community. I myself looked at it as a way of undermining a system that continuously kept black people at a lower level in society. Now, some may like to talk about me and call me an Uncle Tom or say I'm selling out. I call it living as white. Now, though I do have some black in me, I consider myself to be a predominantly white ancestry, as did many of my other counterparts. You have to understand, it was a point in time when, 1880, when my parents, now mind you, I've had a long career, darling. It's been a good one, too. But as I said, it was a way of undermining a system that kept black people at a lower level in society. Now, some may say that they want to call me an Uncle Tom or say I'm selling out, but I call it as living as predominantly white. Though I do have black in me, I do consider myself to be of white ancestry. You know, one would say it's hard to know if you ever fit in or where you fit in. Good evening. My name is Belle Marion Greener, and I was born on November 26, 1879, to Richard T. Greener and Genevieve Ida Fleet. My parents listed me as black on my birth certificate, and they believed that times were changing and it wouldn't hinder me at having a better life. However, in 1880, my parents listed me and my siblings as white. In 1880, white, black, and mulatto, they were all options, as were Chinese and Italian. You know, like many states, the District of Columbia did not have a legal definition of what race was. So it left for cultural assumption as to who was black and who was white. Hopefully, after hearing my story today, you will understand why I chose the way I did.
Many states literally rewrote their definitions of black and white, expanding the definition of black or Negro, which would include people of mixed ancestry. In 1865, the one-drop rule, or ODR, was established in St. Augustine, Florida. The one-drop rule changed the legal term and was used to separate white citizens from others. This rule indicated that if a person with any trace of black or African ancestry, however small or invisible, could not be considered white. Richard Greener, Belle's father, was biracial, born in Philadelphia in 1844 as a free man. There wasn't a lot of information about their white ancestors. Greener's history indicated that they were not closely aligned with their darker members of their family. He was the offspring of an enslaved black woman who was forced by her master into a sexual relationship. As time went on, freed family members would purchase family members, not releasing them to freedom, but continuing to have them legally as property. Sometimes they would be sold and exploited for their labor. There were some cases when white men who fathered children with enslaved women would acknowledge their offspring and take responsibility for them, granting them freedom and support. This was not the case for the Greener family. There seems to be no evidence or financial support, presence, or acknowledgement of their white ancestors, except by their Spanish grandfather. Greener and his family were not considered upper class. He studied for 2 years at Oberlin, but would return back to Boston, where he was enrolled in Phillips Academy, another preparatory school. He would be only one of an African-American student and would face trouble and conflict at Oberlin, which would cause him to leave. The conflict at Oberlin would follow him later on in his career. He spoke about believing that racism had prevented him from receiving honors that he felt he had deserved. Richard Greener was supported by a program designed to benefit Negro education at Harvard College. This program was launched in the immediate post-Civil War era. During his first year as a freshman, he found it to be hard. He struggled, living alone in the dorm. Though he was mistreated from classmates, he did not report it, believing it would be ignored. Eventually, a new black student would join him. His name was Wendell Phillips. Greener's time at Harvard gave him mixed feelings and made him feel isolated from his race, but it did not cause him to disassociate himself from the black community. He would become Harvard's first black graduate. As he continued to work and socialize with African Americans, he recognized that both personal and racial success meant working with white Americans to promote social change. Greener caught the attention of prominent leaders that fought for justice and equality. For years, Greener followed the careers of Frederick Douglass and Senator Charles Sumner. Greener worked for the New National Era and clerked for the district attorney. He would go on to begin preparing for law school. That's when he began courting one of D.C.'s elite eligible daughters, the beautiful Genevieve Ida Fleet. Genevieve was biracial and was born in the 1940s to James H. and Hermione Peters Fleet. Her family's history was very similar to her husband, Richard Greener. Genevieve, also known as Jeannie by her family, was related to the Peters, a family known for their longtime history of Georgetown's free colored families. They came from a long line of teachers, musicians, skilled workers, independent business owners like barbers and physicians, although some did have jobs that required very little skill. Genevieve's family identity came under scrutiny. They had been classified as colored, mulatto, and even black for generations, but the Greeners and their children were all listed as white in 1880. Though they had not shifted their identity, Richard was still a prominent activist, campaigning for civil rights and working with black and white leaders. When it came to being an elite or part of the upper class, income and occupation were not the defining factors for membership. What really defined one's class would be education, occupation, self-perception, or mindset. Genevieve was very used to living as a middle-class woman of color. As Genevieve and Richard began their life together, they both came with two commonalities. They experienced being free African Americans, and they were both presented with the opportunities to achieve higher education. This, however, did not prevent them from going through life struggles of discrimination and limitation. Greener would find himself in the center stage of turmoil. He, unlike his wife, who had lived a sheltered life, protected from the harshest reality of racism, and being privileged in a community of free people of color. This would lead to problems later on in their marriage. Genevieve would return back home to familiar territory where they would depart as he tried to find the right career. Genevieve would later end their marriage and go her separate way. With Belle's father being absent and the family no longer having his monetary support, Belle felt responsible for taking care of the family financially. Junius Morgan, the son of J.P. Morgan's sister, Sarah, began collecting rare books while he was in his teens. Junius and Belle became friends while she was attending Princeton. She had begun her studies of rare books and illuminate manuscripts. Junius was the assistant librarian at Princeton University. They both had an enthusiasm and devotion to early books, which led to many conversations and a close friendship. J.P. Morgan, the financier of Wall Street, had taken on a hobby most people could not afford. He had a growing collection of European arts, rare books, and manuscripts. Junius, his nephew, had been assisting his uncle collecting as well as advising him on how to develop the library. Junius recognized Belle's intellectual appetite of rare books, so he spoke to his uncle about Belle. He wanted to be sure that the priceless and often unique manuscripts would be in good hands. He felt that his uncle would not object to hiring a young woman if she had the ability and the skills to handle such a task. He also knew his uncle had an eye for beautiful women.
Uncle Pierpont, it is my pleasure to introduce Miss Bella da Costa Greene.
It's an honor, sir.
Did you have a chance to research the Rembrandt etchings?
I did, Uncle Pierpont.
Well, let's hear it. I can't promise you that I'll buy them, but I'm always willing to listen.
Uncle, I do believe that Rembrandt conveys more of the humanity of his subjects in his etchings than in his paintings, and in that way they are uniquely valuable, and not just in monetary terms.
A real beauty. Da Costa?
It's a family name. My grandmother is Portuguese.
I know what Junius thinks of the etchings, but I wonder what you think, Miss Greene. What do you think of acquiring the Vanderbilt Rembrandt?
Well, unlike his contemporaries, Rembrandt did all the work of the etchings himself, from enticing the lines on the copper plate with various needles to submerging the plate in the appropriate chemical afterward. It wasn't an easy means to publicize his more famous oil paintings as his contemporaries did. Now, from that perspective, one may say that Rembrandt's artworks were masterpieces done by a genius himself. The etching is remarkable, Mr. Pierpont, as will be the Pierpont Morgan Library if I am chosen as librarian.
If you acquire Mr. Vanderbilt's collection, you will possess the world's largest collection of Rembrandt etchings. Displayed all together, they will give collectors and scholars an unprecedented access and opportunity to study the genius of the old master's skill.
Why do you think I should hire you? I've interviewed lots of men who are older than you. I've interviewed men who have much more experience than you. Why would you make the Pierpont Morgan Library unparalleled?
Well, thank you for bringing that to my attention, Mr. Morgan. It is true I am different than your other candidates in experience, age, and gender. But my inexperience means that I do not come with any hash or stained image as to what the Pierpont Morgan Library should be. Instead, my vision is endless. My age means that I have boundless amounts of time and undivided energy to devote to you and your collection. And my passion for rare manuscripts and early prints means that I will work relentless to accommodate the ideal items to make your library unrivaled. Of course, while learning about the marketplace and bidding from you while I do so. And may I add, Mr. Morgan, the fact that I am a woman means that every time I walk into a room, everyone's eyes will be on me, which is exactly what the Pierpont Morgan Library deserves.
So, would you make my library incomparable? I was thinking if you acquire the Lamort d'Artour by the printer William Caxton, I hope that's on your list of possible acquisitions. You are very impressive, Bella da Costa Greene.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. If given the chance, I will work relentlessly to make your library unrivaled. It will become the masterpiece you deserve.
Belle was on cloud 9 and couldn't wait to tell her family about her first day with Mr. J.P. Morgan. Everyone was so happy for her. They were filled with delight and congratulations and with plenty of hugging. The air in the house was festive and exciting. Everyone began to ask many questions about the great Mr. Morgan. As Belle was blowing out the candle to go to bed, she began to think about her 10th birthday when her father gave her a book as a gift, The Venetian Painter of the Renaissance by Berenson. She would study that book faithfully and go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to educate herself. That's how it all began. Her father introduced her to art. He had a way of revealing the meaning of a painting and the life of the painter who created it. When she would listen to her father closely, she felt as though she were traveling back in time to the moment it happened. She knew her mother and father were not always on the best terms, and was saddened to learn her father would no longer be supporting the family. Belle always had a desire to be successful. She could recall her father saying, "Our Belle Marianne is going to be a scholar one day, or a historian." Before, she had a desire to be successful, but now it was no longer just her desire, it was her commitment. As Belle began her new occupation as a librarian, she added her finishing touch. She would identify volume, catalog, making sure everything was housed properly in the 2-story library building. In the vault, they had stored many unique and very expensive manuscripts. JP's collection was unique. There was not a collection like it in the United States. Belle would deal with all of Morgan's eclectic treasures, but it was books that were always her priority and her pride. Mr. Morgan would loan out his art or book collections to museums around the world. He made the comment, Is it really so much to ask people to return your belongings in a timely fashion? Of course, it would be Belle's responsibility to retrieve some of those items, making sure they were returned safely to the library. Mr. Morgan was an interesting man. Even though he was married, he had his special friends. These special friends could be interchangeable, and their friendship could be short-lived. I guess you could say he was a family man. His wife, Mrs. Morgan, did not make many appearances at the library, even though it was literally next door to her home. Now his children were another matter. They were there regularly. Mr. Morgan had 4 children, 1 boy and 3 girls. John Pierpont Jr., also known as Jack, Juliet, Louisa, and Anne. Juliet was known for her beauty, and Louisa for her smarts. Both Juliet and Louisa were married, unlike Anne, whose friends, in her father's opinion, were undesirable. Of all the children, Anne is the one that did not get along well with Belle. J.P. treated Anne with the most care. As a child, she was very shy. In her adulthood, her political views became very liberal, even unorthodox, which contradicted her father's views. He feared she would break from the family, so he tread very softly with her. He never felt Anne dressed femininely enough. He once complimented Belle on the way she dressed and told her he wished his daughter Anne could learn from her. Anne felt she was always being compared to her sisters and knew that her dad wished she could be more like them. Anne was somewhat tolerant but not pleasant with her father's female librarian, no matter how useful or helpful she was. When Anne and Belle were together with Mr. Morgan, Anne seemed quite quick-witted, saying things to get a reaction from Belle. Belle felt that at one time they could have been friends, but too much tension existed between them. Maybe it had to do with her father's infidelity. Anne could be jealous of other women monopolizing her father's time. Belle tried to bridge the gap, but Anne seemed to have a total dislike for her. One thing for sure, Belle had built a life for herself, and she was not about to allow Anne to disrupt it. Belle was under mounting pressure as her responsibilities increased. She had to become familiar with experts due to the wide range of treasures her boss had collected. Belle's role had become larger, and she would be granted greater independence in making decisions with running the day-to-day business of the library. Within a few years, she would be making purchases on her own and had replaced Junius as Pierpont's primary advisor on manuscript matters. It was a mutual respect that J.P. Morgan and Belle had for one another, given Belle's humble beginnings. Many were amazed by the amount of trust she had received. She became Morgan's, shall we say, right-hand woman. You could say it started when Mr. Morgan asked her opinion of the Cicero 1468 that Olsky, his assistant, delivered. She answered in a way rejecting the manuscript, leaving Mr. Morgan to ask why. She stated, "Compared to the market, the price that Mr. Olsky is requesting is ridiculous and insulting. 8,000 francs, she asked. He's demanding that obscene amount because you are J.P. Morgan, known for your wealth and generosity." This would be the beginning of her wrangling with dealers over pricing. She would discuss with J.P. Morgan, as she stated, "Give me the opportunity to act as gatekeeper. You will not have to deal with such matters in the future." It made Mr. Morgan smile as he envisioned a picture of the petite Belle standing guard for him, the infamous Hulk. Morgan gave Belle permission to protect him and his collection, and that she did. With Belle's new role, Morgan invited her to her first ball at the Vanderbilt home. She would be treading new territories, dealing with Morgan's adversaries in the form of dealers, experts, and collectors alike. Belle realized that she had to tread carefully, for she was now going to the home of one of the richest families in America. She knew enemies could be especially dangerous for a colored girl named Belle Marion Greener, but she had now crossed the threshold into a wider white world as Belle da Costa Greene. May 28th, 1906. Vanderbilt Mansion was surrounded by women in extraordinary gowns, gleaming with crystals and pearls, and men in white tie formal wear. Belle presents the butler with her invitation. He squints as if he could see through her. His stare made Belle tense, and her mind scrolled through her mother's instruction. Stand tall, square shoulders, glance steady, never waver. The butler's eyes stayed on her. Belle's heart began to pound as his gaze shifted from her to the invitation. Once again, she hears her mother's voice. Be cautious. Never do anything to stand out. She began walking around the room. Seeing her second person of color, the server, Belle accepts the champagne. She began glancing around the room, walking, showing confidence, smiling, and making eye contact. She walks and crosses the room, taking in the room's breathtaking view. She notices the black waiter that gave her the champagne looking at her as if she weaves through the grass, and Belle quickly looks away. The server continues to look at her as if she knew her secret. Belle, thinking to herself,
Does my deceit anger her? Will she reveal my true identity? Am I going to lose everything I've worked for?
she began hearing her mother's voice in her head. If you see any colored people, stand tall, don't make eye contact. If eye contact is made, only acknowledge with a nod and then turn away. She did just as her mother said. The server nods at her and continues to serve. Weaving through the guests, she begins to move away from the crowd when she hears,
Miss Greene. It is Miss Greene, isn't it?
Indeed it is.
It's a pleasure to see you out of the library.
It's a pleasure to be out of the library, if I don't say so myself.
You look lovely. Nothing at all like a librarian.
Well, just because I'm a librarian doesn't mean I need to dress like one.
Of course.
There is more to me than meets the male eye.
That is an exquisite hat.
I don't doubt that you say that to all the ladies, but I like it just the same.
I see you've met some of my enemies.
Oh, Mr. Morgan, I've always considered you a friend and an occasional client.
Do you deceive all your friends?
Swindle.
Swindle.
Oh, is this the man that tried to sell you the flawed Mozart manuscript?
He's the one.
No need to worry about that, Mr. Morgan.
Why is that, Miss Greene?
Because the next time we do business, I will be there to authenticate the antiquity of any piece that tries to come through the Pierpont Morgan Library. And should one come through our door that does not muster up to par, which of course would be no fault of Mr. Smithson's, I will stop it before it ever reaches your desk.
Excellent, Miss Greene.
Isn't that right, Mr. Smithson?
It would be my honor to do business again with you, Mr. Morgan, and you as well, Miss Greene.
You played him very well. You speak as no one else. My friends who are men don't speak as well as you. My son doesn't speak as well as you. Let's wander around the room and see if we can find some more of my enemies.
November 4th, 1906, New York, New York. A whole new world had opened to Belle. She no longer organized Morgan's shelves and catalogs. She now advised on acquisitions and socialized with Morgan's friends and was on invitation lists everywhere. She had become very comfortable chatting with Frick about Renaissance paintings, talking to Caspar Perdon Clark about the fine detail of decorative arts, dancing with John D. Rockefeller, and sitting with the Carnegies at the opera. Morgan may have relied on Belle's advice in allowing her to negotiate for many of his purchases, but she knew not to overstep her place. He made his decisions at his own pace. When she would be excited by a piece that she felt was great for his collection, he would take his time, delaying her. This really frustrated Belle at times. There was the time she wanted to acquire a Bible printed by the University of Cambridge in 1638. It was King Charles I's own copy with red velvet embroidery. He politely reminded her of the Caxton Le Morte d'Arthur that she had promised to get him during her interview. He reminded her, saying, "Belle, I hired you to get the Caxton, and of course, for your impeccable eye for ancient manuscripts and medieval art." Then he smiled, saying, "But if I can't have the Caxton right now, I will settle for the Bible." Mr. Morgan's success had yielded several benefits that awarded Belle. She was receiving her first raise, which allowed her to move her family to a 3-bedroom apartment near Central Park. He continued to give her greater latitude in identifying pieces for his collection, which Belle had turned into a series of small victories, securing masterpieces for the Pierpont Morgan Library. In October 1907, the financial marketplace took a downturn. The newspapers were reporting the collapse in copper share, which took down other stocks like Domino's. People began to get fearful because they knew a large percentage of stocks served as collateral for many banks and trust loans. Mr. Morgan decided to prevent her from further purchases, and he never mentioned the Caxton, which he desired to have. On October 10th was the night before Mr. Morgan was scheduled to leave for the Episcopal Convention in Richmond, Virginia. Belle usually arrived before him. Before she pulled off her coat, she noticed him slumped over in his chair. She could see that he was in distress. Mr. Morgan asked her to sit down. Belle was afraid of the news she might hear, and her thoughts went to her family. She began to think, how will this affect us? Mr. Morgan told Belle about his investment company and informed her that they were already on the brink of financial ruin. He would go on to tell her that he was on the verge of suicide until his wife found him with the gun. Mr. Morgan was feeling defeated, and his head down and his eyes lowered. Not really knowing what to say, Belle began extending her apologies and politely departed the room, allowing him space. Several weeks later, historically, J.P. Morgan was known for being a major player during the 1907 bankers' panic, Knickerbocker crisis, helping to shore up the banking system and famously locking bankers in the library one night to get to an agreement. March 1908. Belle and her family would receive sad news. Her grandma Fleet had died. So they decided to make the trip from New York to Washington, D.C. Belle thought this would be a great opportunity to take a break. Things had been sort of chaotic, but were easing up since the night J.P. saved the country from financial ruin. She was also proud of her own accomplishments, of the important acquisitions she orchestrated, and the direction the library was going. But yet, she felt weighed down by her loss.
Come along, Russell. Mother, are you all right?
Of course, just a little tired, bit concerned, but I'll be fine. Just let me get some rest.
Okay. Just let me know if you need anything. I'll be sitting right there.
Thank you, dear.
All aboard!
Well, this trip seemed a lot longer than I had anticipated. Would anyone, you know what? Time will go a little faster if we play some cards. Anyone want to play Go Fish with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I will.
No.
I'll go first. Ooh. All right, Teddy, give me your hearts.
Hey, Ethel, give me your hearts.
Oh, you would, wouldn't you? You know, it seems sort of strange that we're going to DC. When was the last time we went there?
At least 10 years.
It's been 12. I was 16 the last time that we went. We used to go a lot more, but then we just stopped.
Russell, what are you doing? There you go cheating. I thought you were a good card player. Here you've been cheating all along.
What do you mean? What did I do?
I saw you take all those cards from them. You're not supposed to be pulling yet. Yeah, it wasn't even your turn. It was Teddy's turn.
You got me all wrong. You mean it wasn't my turn?
No. Oh, that's okay. I tell you, I'm getting bored with cards also. Let's just sit and talk.
That's fine. You're getting kind of loud anyway. Mama is trying to sleep.
Anyway, Belle, why did we stop going to DC?
We stopped going because Papa left. After he left, we couldn't afford it. Don't you remember how we struggled so before Mama's career as a music instructor started off?
Oh, I guess I try not to think about it. But I wonder where Papa is.
I don't care where the hell he is.
Russell, that is not nice.
I could say the same thing about what Dad did. That wasn't nice.
Now, Russell, what Dad did or did not do, he is still our father.
I don't remember DC, and I only have a few strong memories of Papa.
Oh, she was very young.
Next stop, Washington, D.C.
Oh, all right, everyone, get your things. Russell, help everyone with their bags.
Yes, Mother.
No, Russell, we'll be leaving through the rear.
Okay, Mother.
Fellow passengers began staring at them, noticing that they came from the whites-only section as they began to exit the train. Belle begins to compare the white and colored sections. Though the colored seats were the same as the white, they had no upholstery on them, only hard wooden seats. No tables were installed, and no luggage racks for the passengers were there to store bags. And the smell from the bathroom made her want to gag. Seeing inside the colored bathroom, she notices that there's nothing more than a bucket and an old rundown sink. She thought to herself, it's amazing how powerful the laws and geography are. Each state can be different. They left one state, New York, as white and arrived in Washington, D.C. as colored. Teddy, her younger sister, was annoyed because unlike the rest of the family, she had been so sheltered that she could not understand why they had to walk where the signs were posted, colored people only. and she did not like the idea that they had to take the route around the back of the train station. It did not appear safe. It had piles of discarded coal, and the alleyway seemed to empty out onto the side of the street. Teddy was not pleased and wanted to understand, why do we have to walk through such a terrible area? It was filthy. Her mother tried to convince her to lower her voice. When they exited onto the dark passageway, onto the bright street, her brother Russell signaled for a driver. The carriage arrived and they loaded the luggage. Then they headed to their family home, the Fleets, on T Street. Their mother, Genevieve, began reminiscing about her mother, Hermione Constantia Peters Fleet. She recalled her mother was one of 6 children. The Peters were known as an elite family of free people of color in D.C. Genevieve was the firstborn, followed by 4 brothers. The first son was named James, after their father and grandfather. The next boys were Mozart, Bellini, and Mendelssohn. The youngest girl was Minerva. Genevieve's mother, Hermione, kept house while the children were growing up. The family lived in an extended family household during her mother's childhood. There were grandparents, aunts, great-aunts, and cousins. When Genevieve's mother began to work for the first time in 1880, it was as a dressmaker. A few years later, she took a job as a clerk in a government office. She remembered it was because of her mother that the family felt they could always have a home to come home to. And it was her mother who made everyone feel welcome. When the door opened, Belle and her mother were greeted by their Uncle Mozart. He embraced their mother first, and then Belle. Belle noticed that her mother looked concerned, but her uncle informed her mother not to worry. All was well. Looking around, Uncle Mozart asked,
Well, where's everybody else at?
Oh, they're just around back, fetching the luggage from the carriage. They'll be right in.
Is that Russell? Oh my goodness, he's got so big. Russell, go ahead and put the luggage around the side of the house. We got cake and iced tea ready for you in the kitchen. Come on in, come on in. Quick, let me get your jackets. I know that train ride must have been mighty long.
Oh, indeed it was.
Get comfortable. Have a seat.
Sit. I mean, if that brown sofa over there ain't too dark for y'all.
Minerva, what's gotten into you, girl? That ain't no way to be talking to family.
What? What you expect me to do? Just sit here and ignore the fact that our own sister has turned her back on us?
Oh,
That's not what I've done.
So it ain't, huh?
No. I'm still a fleet.
Could have fooled me. You don't act like it. And how dare you wouldn't even let your own brother come visit?
No, that's not how it was. I thought he'd stop coming because Richard was no longer around.
No, he stopped coming because y'all considered y'allself whack. So he thought it'd be best to stay away. And you never much really invited him anyway, so he didn't think you wanted him to come visit.
Look,
right?
That's right.
You don't know what it's like in New York. I was abandoned with 5 children, abandoned by the father of my children. You don't know what it's like in New York, Minerva. I did what I had to do for my family.
I don't understand. No, it's you who doesn't understand. We told you that you always had a place here, Jenny. You could have come home at any time and we would have welcomed you with open arms.
This neighborhood, this place, it's not always going to be the same. These blatant attacks on colored folks, black people, it's just a burden I didn't want my children to have to shoulder.
Okay. Let's calm down. Let's have a seat and have a conversation. Have a seat. Now look, I'm going to be honest. I don't agree with everything Genevieve is saying. But what I do know is Mama would not want us talking like this in her house. There is so much positive that we can focus on. I mean, look what she's doing with her daughter. Belle is working with none other than J.P. Morgan himself.
J.P. Morgan? Don't nobody care about no J.P. Morgan. That's why they think they better than us now. Talking about working for J.P. Morgan.
Let's focus on the positive. Mama wants us to focus on family. And this week, that's exactly what we're doing. Let's focus on what's bringing us closer together rather than what's driving us apart. This week, let's try to make it positive. Go ahead and hug your sister. Go ahead, come on.
The time they spent for Grandma Fleet's funeral would be bittersweet. Belle's uncle expressed how proud of her he was before she left. He wanted her to be careful because he knew she could be exposed at any time. Belle told her uncle that her life when she left home was like stepping out onto a stage, playing a role. She wanted him to know that she was being careful, but her uncle expressed to her that she could never be careful enough. Belle knew that the risk was high, but she felt surely it was worth the reward. After attending her grandmother's funeral, her thoughts would go back to her Uncle Mozart's words. I don't think you can be careful enough. She would push that thought out of her mind, but somehow his words would find their way back. Belle had attended an art gallery show presented by Edward Steichen, where he was showing work on two European sculptors, Auguste Rodin and artist Henri Matisse. They seemed to really want her opinion on the art, which she obliged. After giving her professional opinion, she also spoke to reporters and left without a care. The next day, while working at the library, things seemed off. She had been in her office for several hours, and not a peep was heard from Mr. Morgan. Once again, her Uncle Mozart came to mind, and as before, she brushed the thoughts aside. She decided to go to Mr. Morgan's office because they had to prepare for the Sotheby's auction. Belle raised her hand to knock, and she had a rush of fear and anxiety come over her, not knowing but wondering if she had angered him in some way. She could not think of any disagreement that could have caused any concern. Feeling unsettled, she knocks. Mr. Morgan, may I have a minute of your time to discuss the Sotheby's auction? No words, just silence. She thought to herself, what if he's hurt? She opened the door quickly, seeing Mr. Morgan seated at his desk, head engrossed in the newspaper. Relieved that he was okay, but still, he did not respond to her. Belle stated, you've been behind closed doors this morning. We need to discuss the Sotheby's items. Mr. Morgan asked, why should I meet with you? Belle, not understanding the question, but recognized that he had a problem with her. Many thoughts began going through her head. Uncle Mozart's words once again haunted her. Did he find something out? Had her deception been discovered? Was it in the newspaper? Had his daughter said something? Mr. Morgan spoke to her, saying, I found an article on you in the newspaper. She found out an article he had read, was concerning someone overhearing a conversation and taking her words out of context. She was relieved. It had nothing to do with her deception and her identity. This she felt she could handle. But things weren't as easy as she thought. She would have 2 warnings given to her by Mr. Morgan, as he explained that first, she did not have the luxury to make mistakes. And second, she must never forget that it is his name that is carved above the library's doors, not hers. Belle knew that he was giving her a warning not to overstep her line, and that she never had to be reminded of again. In 1909, Belle would finally meet Mr. and Mrs. Bernard Berenson. Yes, the one and the same from the book her father gave her as a child. His wife was a writer too. They were giving lectures in the region and seeing important collections. Belle would find herself intrigued, thinking, I must get to know this man. Flirting began between the two of them. She would later be introduced to Miss Rachel Costello, Mrs. Berenson's daughter. Through their conversation, she learned that Mr. and Mrs. Berenson loved each other, but they were free to pursue other romantic affairs. Their marriage was what her daughter stated, very cosmopolitan. Learning that their marriage was an open one, Belle believed that she could allow the flirting with Mr. Berenson to continue further. They would end up meeting several times. Each time their relationship became more intense. When he left New York, they began to correspond through letters until they would meet in person again, either abroad or in the States. Belle and Berenson often traveled together in search of rare works. They shared in a love of Islamic manuscripts and miniatures. Belle would later find out that she was pregnant with Bernard's child, which would put stress on their relationship. She would lose the child to an unwanted abortion. When Belle found herself going through the ordeal of losing her child with no support from Bernard, she became angry and slowly lost contact by not writing him back. It would be Bernard's wife, Mary, who spoke to Belle, reminding her that they both still had feelings for each other and that Belle should give her husband a second chance. It was unorthodox for her former lover's wife to thrust them into each other's arms, which allowed the long love affair to continue. On April 20th, 1911, Belle finally saw an opportunity where she could grant J.P. Morgan's wish. Though she had made many important purchases, she wanted to add the long-awaited Caxton Le Morte d'Arthur to Mr. Morgan's collection. She remembered when he hired her, she guaranteed him with her as his employee, she would gain its possession. Belle would be in a bidding battle against Mr. Huntington, trying to gain the possession of the Caxton. The auctioneer started at $15,000, which was unreasonably high. She and Mr. Huntington continued in a high-state tit-for-tat until all of the other bidders fell away. The level reached to $45,000. The auctioneer resumed bidding in $500 increments. She was determined, but a little nervous. She had already gotten permission from Mr. Morgan, but she never expected to get so close to $50,000. 46, she bid with a flick of her signature red scarf. Mr. Huntington bid until Belle stated 50,000. People rumbled. Then a silence grew among the people, and the auctioneer cried, "Sold for 50,000." Belle's heart raced. She did it. She succeeded. The media all called out for her. "Miss Greene, Miss Greene." Even though it was nearly 10 in the evening, Belle returned to the library to complete some work she'd abandoned in order to attend the auction. She wanted to place the long-awaited Caxton Le Morte d'Arthur on Mr. Morgan's desk.
I'm surprised to see you here, sir.
Surprised? It's time to congratulate you, Belle. Not only did you secure the precious Caxton for me, but I heard you're the toast of the town.
I did procure the Caxton.
That's an understatement. You grabbed the Caxton away from a scoundrel. He came into town and tried to steal all my stuff.
Well, I'm glad you're pleased.
I'm very pleased. How many years has it been, Belle?
5, Mr. Morgan.
Is that the Caxton in your hands?
Yes, it is. One day a king will come and a sword will rise again.
You've done it, Belle. This calls for a toast. I've been saving that bottle for you and me for a long time. I knew this wonderful day would come. There'll be a write-up in every paper in New York tomorrow.
Really? About your triumph, yes.
My triumph? It's your triumph. The beautiful young librarian for James P. Morgan. It's an American success story. And that's not all. Your fame will extend all over New York. There will be articles about you in newspapers from London to Chicago.
Belle became the face of J.P. Morgan's library. Though the field she worked was predominantly male, she had a unique personality and she could hold her own. She became powerful in her own right. Known for her impeccable taste, being courted by art dealers, she was embraced by the socially powerful, profiled as an elegant careerist, and also known for her shrewd negotiations for artifacts and manuscripts. Belle really believed that she was saving the past for the future, rescuing and protecting important history treasures. Belle was known for her flirting ways with men. She often stepped over social norms in her friendships with them by seeing them without other company. Belle had verbally stated she preferred socializing with men over women. But she had many female friends, such as female artists, writers, and other interesting women that others would consider unwanted characters. Many of these women may not fit in with what society called proper social norm. Some of the women belonged to the women's suffrage movement. Many felt Belle's relationship with women were hard to gauge. A few rumors circulated saying that Belle openly flirted with men as a way to mask her relationship with women. Belle was certainly economically independent and had often described marriage as much as being a financial agreement than anything else. And while she was defining the social definition of morality in her relationships with men, she had a very strong sense of right and wrong and a code of proper behavior to which she tried to adhere. Besides, the language during her period, people were not labeled as we do today. Not saying tongue didn't swag, though many have talked about it. I would say they had their own codes of decency and morality. One may even say, when it came to men and women expressing their friendship, whether platonic or lovers, it was not necessarily expressed in a sexual way as it is today. Belle did not have any children of her own. She was haunted by the abortion she had through her relationship with Bernard Berenson. She always felt it would not be wise for her to have a family due to her secret of hiding her heritage. When speaking to her mother, she often said, "I've always known that because of my heritage, a traditional relationship would not be possible for me, because a marriage means children, and that is something I cannot hazard." Even though her siblings had fairer skin, her feeling was she could never risk bearing a child whose skin color might reveal her deception. There were rumors going on about her relationship with Mr. Morgan. Belle and Mr. Morgan had shared an intimate moment, but they discussed the first time it happened that a relationship between the two of them would not happen. It was stated, no, we shouldn't, we couldn't. They both agreed it was the right choice. Though they came to an agreement, it did not deter Mr. Morgan's behavior. There was jealousy. Mr. Morgan at times would try to dictate what he wanted Belle to do or who she should see. Many times he spoke as if he had ownership over her. Of course, that did not sit well with Belle. She would speak her mind and basically put him in his place, which would put a strain on their relationship. But no matter what, they were under each other's skin. They needed each other. Morgan's health began to deteriorate by 1913. The stock market declined. Mr. Morgan's family was protecting him. He was declining into paranoia and dementia. On March 31st, 1913, he passed away in his sleep. This had an effect on Belle. She was brought to an emotional and professional halt. The life she once knew was now on hold. Belle had seen some of the great collected and private art of America, England, France, and Italy. True, Belle had some financial stability and powerful connections with bankers, publishers, scholars, potential patrons, and employers. She credited it to J.P. Morgan, for he was the one who gave her a chance to prove her ability. Morgan's body would be brought straight from the harbor to his office in the library's West Room. Later, Belle joined the Morgan family and hundreds of mourners, following the casket in a horse-drawn carriage to the service at St. George's. She would travel with his family members to the church at Hartford, Connecticut, Cedar Hill Cemetery. Belle would discover when she returned to New York that neither grief nor her worries had lessened. Mr. Morgan had been so much a part of her life that being without him was more troublesome than she thought. She hoped that the work she did would soften some of her sadness and concerns. Within the week, she would be summoned to Jack's office. She was unsure of what to expect. You could say she was a little panicked, thinking what will become of her and her family. She would find her concern was unwarranted. The first provision was directed to him to maintain Belle's employment for the term of at least a year to ensure that Belle would guide Jack to the goals they had shared. Mr. Morgan knew that Jack would need time to be convinced of the importance of the collection and the significance of keeping it together. The second provision was financial. Mr. Morgan left the largest personal bequest aside from the family members. His father left Belle $50,000. Belle was stunned. The amount and sum would provide for her and her family, mainly they were considered secured for life. Mr. Morgan exceeded his generosity by not inserting any sort of stipulations. He had given her the freedom to live her life as she chose. December 1913.
Jack, I can't thank you enough. Knowing that we're going to be able to keep the collection together it just keeps your father's legacy alive.
This is a key step in creating the larger meaning that Papa and I discussed, and I'm glad to hear it. We shall maintain the core collection here, the books and the manuscripts, the treasures you deem most important.
Thank you, Jack. I was sad in thinking I'd have to sell off much of the collection that your father and I acquired together, but knowing that I can keep it intact, it's just deliverance.
Jack? Jack? Jack, are you here?
We're in Belle's office.
I knew you were back, so I went to your house to welcome you home, and they told me you came here first. Why here?
Well, it couldn't wait. I had some good news to share with Belle.
You mean it couldn't keep until tomorrow? You just gotten off a transatlantic voyage. You must be tired.
The library will survive, in my role as guardian of the books and manuscripts as well. Belle has agreed to stay on and help manage the library. I feel it's a fitting tribute to Father. You know, Father always, what brought him the deepest pleasure was reading the voice of the past, collecting the books and touching the letters and manuscripts.
Jack, you're so right. Those letters and documents and manuscripts, they created a connection between your father and I. I believe that each one of them had their own personalities, that the more that we read, the more we would understand the world. But the more we read, the more questions we had.
Well, I've delivered the news. I think I shall go home for dinner. Jesse's probably waiting. Belle, are you coming?
I'll be there. I'll catch up with you. I'd like a word alone with Belle first. Well, Belle, I won't pretend that I like you. As a matter of fact, I think you had my father wrapped around your little finger, and I don't like what you turned him into during his final years.
Anne, your father was not a pushover. He was a force of nature. I was hired to do one job, which was his bidding.
Belle, don't take me for a fool. I don't know how you did it, but you found a way to bend my father to your will when nobody else could.
Anne, I know that you had a busy life, and that left little time for your father. And you believe that what you're saying is true, but I never had that capability over him.
Really, none of what I'm saying has any bearing on what I want to tell you. I understand you become friends with Bessie.
Friends, no, but we're not enemies either. We do see each other from time to time, and we are cordial.
Were you aware that my father hated Bessie? Bessie was being offered the French Legion of Honor a couple of years before my father died. It was for her work representing French playwrights. She clearly deserved that award, but my father interfered and made sure she did not receive it. You see, my father was suspicious of our relationship. He felt this was a way of punishing her. He wanted a way to punish me for not being the daughter he always wanted. He was always comparing me to Juliet or Louisa.
I'm so sorry, Anne. I didn't know.
My father and I did not always see eye to eye, but no matter what, I still loved him. It did not matter to me how many fallings out we had, nor did it matter what he thought about me.
And your father loved you in his own way.
Yes, I suppose you're correct. He did leave me with enough money so I can live my life as I please and support causes without needing to get married. I am indebted to him for that. You know, Bessie told me I got you all wrong. Not that I'm saying I agree with her. For the most part, I disagree, of course. One thing I do know is that I can't continue my father's legacy with our public disparity in our political and social views. You are the right person for the job with your expertise and your loyalty to my father's vision. With that being said, I want you to know you have my full support as a librarian for the Pierpont Morgan Library, no matter who you really are. I know, I probably shouldn't ask. Something is telling me to let it end right here, but I really want to know.
How did you find out about me? Who told you my secret?
You, Anne. Belle. I had always suspected, but you just confirmed it for me. No need to worry, Belle. I know how it feels to be judged by society. It's very painful and lonely. Because the world is not ready to accept us, we have to live with a painful secret. It's sad that neither of us have been able to live our lives as our true selves. We have to continue to play a role just so society can accept us, keeping our true identities hidden. I hope that we can keep our secrets from this point on.
Yes, Anne. Our secrets are safe with us.
For a moment, Belle thought that Anne was talking to her, baiting her to fall into her snare by confessing her real heritage. Surely Anne would destroy her. She was pleased to learn that was not so. She and Anne, in some way, had been bonded in sisterhood by secrecy. Belle realized she did not really know who she was. Her identity had been centered around the museum and Mr. Morgan. She was in a dark place, feeling lost now that Mr. Morgan was no longer alive. She had to ask herself the question, who was Belle, her authentic self? She began to research through reading, hoping to understand her father, his decision, and what impact he had on her life. She felt that nothing was more important to her father than what was happening in the good old USA. Events that he viewed important, she would find herself ignoring. She was so busy pursuing her own individual success. Belle began studying a variety of newspapers pertaining to equality. She could just imagine her father's fury at President Wilson's decision to take a hammer to racial equality and authorize segregation within the federal government. He would not be pleased. As she read on about other events, she envisioned the joy, the smile on her father's face as he learned about the work of colored women like Ida B. Wells, Mary Church Terrell, and the 22 young women from Howard University who joined thousands of others in the Women's Suffrage Parade in Washington, D.C., despite the fact they were unwanted. She knew that her father would be very pleased with the women's movement. After reading all of the information, she began to feel a pull toward the cause. Though she had done great work, she realized she had not contributed to the rise of her Black community. Belle began to wonder how she could be of help. She had lived her life as a white woman. Is it possible? Could she ever participate in such an important work for colored people? Should she abandon her false identity and take up the cause to fight for equality? Feeling insecure, thinking to herself, Belle wondered if there was a place for her inside her father's world. Actually, Where was her place? She realized that she had not seen her father in years. Now would be a good time to meet up with her father in Chicago, Illinois. Chicago, Illinois, 1914.
Are you expecting anybody else in your party?
Yes, one person should be coming soon.
Okay.
My daughter. Bill, how are you? It's been a long time. Please sit down.
May I get you something, ma'am?
Coffee.
Coming right up.
Bill, you've traveled the world collecting rare manuscripts and artwork, and I've been overjoyed following your conquests. But you know, I think it was the article in the Chicago Tribune that I was most proud of. When you won the auction for the Caxton Lamort d'Artour, what a triumph. The paper barely captured your scholarly achievements. To be able to have your life's work collecting artwork, it's something I would have done if it was available to me after I left Harvard. What a gift.
A gift you gave me. You were the one who introduced me to the beauty of art and the importance of the written word and its history.
Yes, I'm just so pleased that you were able to follow what you loved. I just wish
What, Papa?
I was there with you. I wish I was able to be by your side and not end up in Russia.
No need to wish. You were the one who planted the seeds to my career.
Well, that may be true, but you're the one that cultivated them. I've followed your career and all the successes you've had, and you've had more opportunity, you've had more success than any colored woman that in history. And you've certainly had more opportunity that's even available to a person like me, a colored person like me. But that's the price, isn't it? Is you've had to pretend to be somebody you're not. You know, I saw your picture in the New York Times, and I was so proud, but at the same time, I was so profoundly sad, because I realized that in order to achieve your dream, you had to forsake your core identity. You know, you can change your name, that's easy, but changing your soul, that's impossible.
You don't approve, do you?
It's not a question of approval. Society forced those choices upon you. There were no good choices for you or for your mother. And who am I to be the judge of the decisions that you've made?
Well, since Mr. Morgan died, I feel so lost. And I can't help but wonder if I'd feel this way if I had made a different decision. I'm asking myself, was the sacrifice worth all this success? It's a relief to start saying this out loud.
Belle, you're more authentic than anyone I know. You've led a life of meaning. It's just unfortunate that you've had to do it as a white person. I wish you knew about a time, it was a brief time during Reconstruction, when a colored man or a colored woman could stand tall and thrive, regardless of the color of their skin.
I know, Papa.
You know, I also hope you understand why I couldn't abandon the fight for civil rights, for equal rights. I couldn't continue to live in two worlds. I couldn't continue to pretend to be a white man. I couldn't pretend to be the father of a white family. I found that the best way to protect the family was for me to go and continue the fight for equal rights. All I've wanted for you children was a brighter future. I still believe in this country that we can have equality. And I'm hoping that one day everybody can achieve their dreams and do it regardless of race.
I wish I had your hope, Papa. I really do. But that's why I'm so conflicted. I know that this life that I live is false at its core, but though I yearn for another one, we live in this world, and I just hope you're not too disappointed in me.
Belle, I could never be disappointed in you. I'm just disappointed that with all the success you've had and to live your life, you've had to do it as a white woman. I'm fighting for a time when you can have that success and do it as a colored person.
But I'm not living my life openly as a colored person. And I'm starting to wonder if I should be. Should I come forth with the truth and serve as an example as you did?
Belle, all I've wanted for my children is the opportunity for them to soar, regardless of their heritage, to lead a life of meaning. And I think with laws and society today, maybe just living a life of meaning is enough. You know, it breaks my heart to say that I don't think you can have both. I don't think you can have a life of meaning, and I don't think you do it as a colored person. But I do believe this. One day we're going to be able to reach back through the past, through the decades, and claim you as one of our own. That you're going to be held up as an example to white people as something we can achieve. So just continue to live your life proudly. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you, Papa.
Belle continued to supplement her inheritance with the $10,000 a year salary that she earned at the library. This was considered a huge sum in those days, especially for a woman. Belle was still financially and emotionally the center of the family. Her mother was not working and was completely dependent on Belle financially. Many of her siblings had moved out on their own and had their own place. But educations for Russell and Louise, and she was also paying for the education of Teddy. Russell moved in with her for a while, but would get married in 1914. He married a white woman and ended up working as an engineer and belonged to a golf club. Belle would go on to be recognized for her services. She was, but is not limited to, the director of the Pierpont Morgan Library, the first woman to become a fellow in the Medieval Academy of America, nominated as a fellow at the Academy for the Advancement of American Scholarship in the Middle Ages, a fellow in the perpetuity of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, advisory council for Princeton University's Department of Art and Archaeology, elected to the board of the College of Arts Association and the editorial board of the Gazette des Beaux-Arts and the ART News, served on committees for the Museum of Costume of Art in 1937, offered honorary degrees from the American universities, but modestly declined. There were questions concerning Belle's ancestry. Belle was always the type of person people either loved or hated. There were probably people who would have loved to tarnish her reputation, but accusations of racial passing never came out. By the end of the 1940s, Belle began to have more pressing personal problems. She would end up having a bad fall, breaking her arm. She was demoralized because it took several months to heal. As life moved on, Belle began to feel that she was defined more by death than by life. She would lose a very close friend, Henri Hibernat, in May 1941. She was unable to visit him before he died. Her mother died on March 22nd, 1941, in her early 90s. She would learn of Jack Morgan's death on March 13, 1943. Just as his father did, he left Belle $50,000 in his will. Her adopted son, Robert, dropped out of Harvard before graduating, but she was compensated when he enlisted and entered pilot training during World War II. By summer, Belle was recovering from her grief when the worst news possible came. Her adopted son, Robert Mackenzie Loveridge, died on August 3rd, 1943. Robert had enlisted Belle as his emergency contact and executor of his will, and he had given her power of attorney. However, Belle did not want to challenge her sister, Teddy. She would try to keep her head up, but her nephew's passing was the greatest personal blow from which Belle truly never recovered. By the end of 1943, she suffered another fall. Some said she had a stroke. In 1945, she would lose her sister Ethel. Belle's only family member now was her brother Russell, as well as her sister Teddy, whom she was still estranged due to her nephew's estate. Between treatments and periods of recuperation, Belle was still a strong presence in the Morgan Library. In the late 1947s or early 1948s, Belle told the Morgan Library trustees that it was finally time to find a successor. She retired from the position in 1948. Newspaper coverage of Belle's retirement once again brought into question her mysterious personal life. The article noted she had lived a life of European tours, of chats with kings and diplomats, and it even included images of her submerged in her work through the narrow backroom corridors of the library. In early April 1950, Belle suffered a final stroke that left her completely unable to speak or to move her right side. Her room was filled with huge bouquets of flowers sent by many of her friends and colleagues. She was alert and aware of her surroundings, but she was not expected to live much longer. She could no longer hold off the rumors about her ancestry. It was believed by her friend that her family could not trust her silence, and that was the reason her brother and sister did not come to visit her during her final days. One thing was for sure, is that the absence of her family was known. Her final days were spent in the company of the hospital staff and a few loving friends. Bella da Costa Greene died May 10th, 1950. Arrangements and details were made by Anne Height. When she died in 1950, the New York Times referred to her as one of the best-known librarians in the country. Just before her death, Belle burned all of her personal papers to further obscure her heritage and lineage. Belle's biography would be based on numerous letters sent to Berenson over the years by Heidi Artizone. This concludes our story.
All right, if we can stop the music a second. How about a round of applause again for the cast and their production? Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, this is a community-wide initiative. It takes a lot of engagement from those actors, from people building sets for the stages, for that technology group back there that keeps us linked up. It's just been a wonderful process. This is the first program that we've done since the pandemic, so we're really glad to be back. Do you want us doing this again next year? Thank you. Thank you. We're going to keep it going. At this time, I want to recognize a couple people. First, if they would come forward, Peggy Jackson, our director, and Christine Quintana, the assistant director. Yeah, she's still working. Yeah. Thank you. Raise it up, let us see. Yeah. We're waiting on Peggy's assistant, Christine Quintana. We need to get her in the spotlight for a minute. But we have a meal that we're serving downstairs, so we'd like for you to stay and fellowship with us. That's one of the things, especially those of you that are part of churches. We are trying to build stronger relationships across our community. This is just one of the ways to do that, right? So as we grow, we can spend time with each other. So I'm going to pray for a minute. I'm going to pray for the meal and for all those that are going to stay and fellowship with us, and then I'll get Christine to come up here. God, we thank you for this time of this play, this program, to just let us share a little bit about the history of this country and the people in this country. We recognize that Black history is far beyond February, and we pray that we're able to see the scope and the breadth of all people in this country and their contributions to this country and the contributions to your world. Lord, we ask that you bless the meal, that it will energize us, inspire us to be united as we grow. We know that that is a tough challenge, Lord, but we ask that you give us that energy to continue to fight for those things that are good. All these things in your son's name we pray. Amen? Amen. Christine, you have to come forward. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate what you're doing. All right? Good. All right. All right. You can follow Christine downstairs if you're going to. Thank you.